Hi again, this is Jim Rush, and I'm continuing on with the series of YouTube presentations on healthcare emergency management, and I'm going through the various annexes. We talked a little bit in the beginning about the emergency management program in total, the emergency operations plan, and a readable, short enough version where employees and healthcare leaders will read that opening emergency operations plan. And then the meat and potatoes comes with the annexes, and that's where we're at right now. And I am going to put some instructions on LinkedIn to help people gain access to all of the presentations that we're going to do, both on emergency management and later mass casualty management, trauma, burn, those types of management issues. But today we're going to do the Emergency Operations Plan Annex for medical materials. If you like the presentation, press the subscribe button below, and then after we get the instructions up on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to access access all of the presentations and be able to pick and choose. We're going to try to organize them via a playlist. So for those of you who are familiar with going through music, you're probably familiar that you can look up an artist and you'll see a playlist of all their songs and their hits. Anyway, the medical materials management objectives for disaster preparedness, disaster readiness, is to provide an expandable and resilient medical material program that can support the healthcare organization before and during disasters or public health emergencies such as the one that we're in right now with the pandemic. A lot easier said than done, but we're going to go into some of the answers in this presentation. And hospitals need to recognize the fastest way to get a frog in your throat is to start a presentation. I just came up with that axiom. Anyway, hospitals will come to, and they are, I think, recognizing the materials manager as the subject matter expert in working with each manager and director and C-staff member in preparing purchasing plans, inventory plans, relationship contracts, and the like. I think after this is over, you'll never look back at these times as fun times, but I think that it will be the dawning of the Vice President of Medical Logistics. So if that can help at all in terms of looking forward, I'm glad that it does. One of the best relationships that can be formed is with the emergency manager for the healthcare organization and the chief of medical material or the supply chain manager or whatever, medical logistics manager, director, because you have so much information and depth in relationship building with contractors, with vendors, with jurisdictions even. So when you need guidance in setting up relationship contracts, guidance documents, the materials manager is the person that you want to work with. So I highly recommend each emergency manager team with their materials manager. The medical materials annex also, materials manager will discuss how the materials management function works during disasters. You'll talk about purchasing, including blanket purchase agreements, indefinite delivery agreements, automatic deliveries, those type of things. You'll go into inventory management, vendor management, group purchasing organizations, what they can do, what they can't do, etc. during disasters, and other hospital contracts. And that'll all be in your materials management annex. The materials manager will play also a very important role in the hospital emergency management committee. And again, it's basically sharing your knowledge with other hospital attendees or members of the Emergency Management Committee. You work with vendors as part of building your annex to make sure that the vendors are not purchasing the supplies and equipment that you're purchasing. They're not buying them from one source, and we've seen that in the pandemic, and that is definitely going to be a lesson learned. And then the supply chain manager or the materials manager will take ownership of all aspects of your hospital's material management program. And that means supplies, equipment, and services. The annex will also basically discuss the pandemic and the fact that it was the worst event to befall medical materials management since World War II. After World War II, the Defense Logistics Agency decided that rather than just pull all the stocks out of the healthcare supply chain, that they would build reserve inventories, and that they would go further than just build inventories in the United States, but they would send a portion of those to the European Theater of Operations and the Pacific Theater of Operations, and that was basically to support the first aspect of the first phase of a war in those theaters, with the remainder of the Defense Logistics Agency's materials held back in the United States, but would start flowing at a preset day after D-Day. So everything had its place on the airplanes and the ships, and they had enough supplies in theater to provide support for the hospitals, and not only that, other entities, until the supply started flowing from the United States. That's how that worked. And we may need a back to the future type of initiative here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And right now the materials managers are dealing with back orders, allocations, and plenty of problem solving and ad hoc problem solving on a day-to-day basis. After the pandemic is finally really over, the healthcare supply chain can begin to recover and begin to prepare your healthcare organization for more normal types of disasters. That would be local and regional type of disasters. Make sure that that your vendors can rapidly reposition stocks from outside your area into your area, and basically make them prove that during exercises. Make sure that they participate in, especially in jurisdiction-wide exercises, because that's when all hospitals, and I'm talking about a local or regional event, but your coalition of hospitals in your town or city are all going to be drawing from a preset number of distributorships. And so when we return finally to just in time, you'll find that those supplies again will very quickly dwindle down and basically run out. So there'll have to be a plan where your distributors pull stock from other centers and bring the stocks into the disaster locale. It's a good thing for them too to begin to think about how to do that in a very expeditious way. Really is, rather than just have that whole area go down as far as supply support. After the pandemic is finished, again, we'll go back to what you might call regular operations, and product standardization is another area for the future I think will help you. When I was stationed overseas with the European, it was the United States Army Medical Materials Center Europe, we standardized our items because we recognized that we could have a much stronger inventory position on a few items rather than a poor inventory position over tens of thousands of items. So we had, I think it was 130 line items that we call the minimum essential item list. And then we had 1,000 line items we called the D-Day significant items list. So these were basically the items that we were going to put our procurement dollars and our inventory dollars into standardized items that we would definitely need. Not only that, it really does help with hospitals ensuring they have a constant supply of the standardized items. It's a good deal and it works. Now looking forward, there is a long-term solution to future pandemics, catastrophic events. You know, we all talk about the big one in California, or the Cascadia event, or Yellowstone. And just like we talked about a pandemic 30 years ago, that not if a pandemic was going to hit us, but when. And of course, we were essentially unprepared from a materials management standpoint to come anywhere close to being able to provide a non-interrupted supply of goods and services. And again, we're going to have to come up with a better solution. Now, if you go back to 1973-74 time frame, is we had that oil embargo, and what we decided that we couldn't be in a position where if the Middle East providers of oil decided to stop providing us oil as they did with the embargo, then we were going to have to have a reserve inventory, and that's what we did. And I guess you would call that a just-in-case Federal Reserve Inventory, and the name they gave it was the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now that was created in 1975 to help us get through any interruptions of oil supplies in the future, and it's worked out very well for us in a number of instances. For medical material and a just-in-case inventory, I call those Federal Reserve Inventories. Any other name that basically indicates that the federal government is going to be owning that inventory, and that the inventory will be managed by national distributors. And you know, I've had the pleasure of working with McKesson and also with Amerisource, and it's not just those two, it's any national distributor is more than capable of managing a initiative like this. You just give them the problem and let them solve it for you. But essentially, I can see looking at what we went through in the pandemic and saying, we don't want to ever go through this again. So let's take a look at we'll say a distributor association, and you all become the umpires in this to make sure that every distributor in America, every national level anyway, distributor manages a portion of the federal owned reserve inventories. And the association with the members, I'm sure, can come up with an extremely fair and equitable distribution of who manages what and who can stock rotate what items. The thing that's amazing, and they will find out soon as they look at what is the monthly consumption of medical supplies in the American healthcare industry pre-pandemic. So let's go back to maybe 2 years ago. So just say 2019. What was the throughput of medical supplies on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? And it will be phenomenal. The throughput, the momentum of medical supplies going through the pipe is so large that we could rotate, we could manage and keep fresh almost phenomenal dollar values of medical material. That's the good news. The American healthcare system always consumed an awful lot of supplies on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So when you put a Federal Reserve inventory as a bubble on each individual national healthcare distributor's inventory, then that will stay fresh forever, because the throughput is so great that if you're talking a 3-year shelf life or a 5-year shelf life, it'd be phenomenal capabilities to keep that, whatever the government decides to procure and put in that reserve inventory, keep it fresh. It would be easy for them, and I hope that gets underway as soon as we take a breath from this pandemic. The other thing that's really good about the Federal Reserve inventory will also be that it will be the fastest way to return to a just-in-time inventory. Trying to sell just-in-time to any healthcare materials manager or chief executive officers, it's going to be a hard sell right now, because they don't have any confidence that the supplies will be there if they drive their inventory values down to, we'll say, a 2-day supply of material. They have a lot of damage has been done to the reputation, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just that a pandemic is different than any other local or even regional disaster, because the consumption of supplies, everyone's going for the same supplies at the same time. The big box stores, we use Sam's Club, and in the very beginning, it brought back so many memories that I had from my days overseas, when everything was rationed. You had a maximum. You could buy one container of toilet paper, one container of paper towels, and it brought back some memories. Anyway. When we come through this, and if we build Federal Reserve inventories, then the individual hospitals and healthcare executives across the whole country will see that there's more than enough stock in there, and they'll have the faith and confidence in the supply chain again to return to a system that really always was the best for normal supply chain operations, and that is just in time. There needs to be reestablishment of a strong correlation between what you order on a daily or weekly basis and what you've used on that daily and weekly basis. And right now, when you have allocations and back orders, extended back orders, it's hard to get any correlation whatsoever. And there's going to be a certain amount of stocking up. It's a nice word for hoarding, but these are all issues where you're trying to protect your healthcare organization. So again, once we get through this, we get a healthcare and a pharmaceutical association to put together a plan with the federal government to build Federal Reserve inventories. It will take the fast track to getting us back to normal and getting us back to the just-in-time inventory management model. Just like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, whenever there's a shortage or a perceived shortage of supply, then the Federal Reserve inventories will simply fill that gap, and it will be seamless, and it will be effortless on the part of the healthcare national healthcare distributors, because they know how to do this. The problem has been that they were never allowed to have those kinds of stock levels that they could provide both stock rotation and a guaranteed stock availability to their customers. And that could be a good day. A couple things that I recommend with all my heart. The American Hospital Association needs to work through their advocacy groups to make sure that there's a place at the table for any healthcare initiative in the future. And I know in the past they had advisory groups. I had a friend that was past president of the Association for Healthcare Resource and Materials Management, and he sat on one of those advisory things. The problem with the advisory committee is that's just it. They advise people as opposed to doing things. The American Hospital Association needs to let the government know that they're the subject matter experts for healthcare, staffing, facilities, materials management, and they have the expertise, and more than their share of expertise, to develop the program and not just assist a group of people who may or may not have anywhere near that level of experience. There's no question the American Hospital Association is the subject matter expert, needs to rise to that occasion if they haven't already. And then the Association for Healthcare Resource and Materials Management needs to have their subject matter expert be one of the guidance people to setting up federally owned Federal Reserve Inventories, and also any materials management program, medical logistics program to support the revitalized national disaster medical system. I think that's in the works, and I don't think there's anybody better than both the American Hospital Association and the Association for Healthcare Resource and Materials Management to make sure that that those vital initiatives are done right. I see in the future materials managers being, like I said in the very beginning of this, fully recognized as the subject matter expert. And I see them being the vice president level as opposed to a director level. And it was really a shock to me when I started out in 1974 in the Air Force, we were at the vice president level, if you could make a correlation between the Air Force healthcare system and the civilian sector. And it was just the way it is. When I had my first assignment, I was in charge of all medical material, linen, sterile supplies, pharmaceuticals, war reserve supplies, and air evac supplies for air medical evacuations. Here I was, 24 years old. Anyway, we wouldn't think of having an executive meeting in an Air Force facility without having your medical logistician in that meeting. And that's where we're going to be in this country at some point. And if there is something good to say about the pandemic, sometimes hard times bring out the truth in terms of who needs to be, or what position needs to be at the vice president level, you know. And so I see the chief executive officer, I see the chief financial officer, I can see the chief operating officer, but also the chief nurse and the chief medical logistician in that C-suite, in order to make sure that all voices are heard properly and that the right voices are putting forth policy and procedures. And another thing that I think will come in the future is the materials manager will be the executive level person in that healthcare organization that will understand the FEMA policies on what they call public assistance. I had the opportunity to serve as the subject matter expert for medical during the Galveston Hurricane Ike disaster, and the first things that we need to look at is what are the hospitals in that area, what are their damages, and what items have they either lost or need repaired, and those kind of things. So the materials manager is perfect for that position, because in the future the materials manager will also be the life cycle equipment management expert, will have in their department an equipment manager, and that equipment manager will be in charge of every piece of equipment, medical and non-medical, in the hospital. And God forbid there is a disaster, and there are a lot of items that have been damaged or destroyed. You can just pull up the items that were damaged from your medical equipment management officer. And in the future, I also see the medical materials manager having being in charge of medical equipment repair and life cycle of medical equipment, especially when it comes to items that are coming out of warranty. And do you continue with the original manufacturer's warranty, or do you transition that piece of equipment over to either an in-house equipment repairer or a third party? But there's some very big savings to be had, but it's got to be done right. And I think that's in the future of materials management also. Another area, and the final area I'll leave you with, is the future of, I think, healthcare administration is going to be in streamlining processes, where I was especially taken back when I came in at 92 was my first foray back into healthcare from being in charge of theater reserve stocks. But I was just amazed at how much time department managers, nursing managers spent on things such as budget development, on things such as ordering supplies and ordering equipment, doing research for equipment. And I'm saying to myself, why don't the finance people, why don't they have a financial consultant on their staff that goes and basically looks at each department's budget last year and serve as their consultant? So instead of taking days and days, that could be wrapped up in a morning, where you look at last year's budget, you look at what the leader wants to do next year. The financial consultant basically puts the budget together, and the materials management consultant can go in and provide all the research that's needed to give that department leader or that unit leader the information they need to purchase the right piece of equipment. And so, I mean, it just makes so much sense. And with the austere staffing that we have throughout healthcare, that you have financial folks doing the budget, most of the legwork for the budget, and let the leaders put the inputs in that are management inputs, but not have to do the spreadsheets and all the rest of the budgetary requirements. Same thing with medical material. If you have a representative, and I like to call it that, your supply representative is at your service and will be there for you when you need help with establishing a next year's equipment purchase plan, and that person will help you basically understand what equipment assets are in the group purchasing organization, which ones need to go outside of a group purchasing organization, and all aspects, the research on the item that the leader is looking at, and all of the background that you have, like the consumer reports for medical equipment. And that kind of thing, a kind of service will be so valuable to the healthcare leaders, and will enable them to spend their time in their specialty rather than trying to become a financial guru or a medical material guru. And that's my pitch for today on materials management. I hope it's helpful to you, and I want to thank you for tuning in. And again, hit the subscribe button if you like it. And I'm going to put a little blurb up on LinkedIn when I'm new to this, but I need to find out what you have to do to make sure you have access to all of the presentations that you like, or that you might want to look at and review, and see which ones you want to tune in for. So once again, thanks an awful lot for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.